Hey, everybody, welcome. What's up, Billy? Thanks, everybody, for coming to a bonus version of my Lsat class that I do every Tuesday and Thursday night in Lsat Demon Live. First 10 minutes of class is just open Q&A, so you guys can shout it out or you can dump questions in the chat. Once we get there, we're going to be moving on to this agenda right here that I just put in the chat. Thank you for those of you who have your cameras on. I see Claudia, I see Felicia, I see Alex, Alexandra, hi, Austin, Fatima, nice, everybody, hey, you're all here. Hugely helpful to me as a teacher for you to leave your camera on. I think it helps you to stay engaged, but it really helps me to know who's getting it and who's not getting it. And we can interact a lot through the nonverbal communication that the camera allows. What have you guys been working on? What can I do for you? We're gonna get started with that agenda in about 10 minutes, but for now it's just open Q&A. So somebody talk to me.
Nathan, I just first like to say, this podcast contains language that can make a judge blush, like had me absolutely crying of laughter when I listened to that. So thank you for that addition. I think last week it was that lawyers often use, right? It was it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Billy's referring to the new joke that we have at the top of every podcast, a little explicit language warning. Hopefully we can keep coming up with fresh ones of those. I think we can.
I just had a quick question just on, I guess, logic games in general, like,
Sure.
And your concept of worlds was actually you touched on the podcast. And and you've touched on this before, and Ben has as well, right? The idea of repeating games or just solving them, because I feel like, taking a step back, logic games is just one of those things where, yeah, the lessons are obviously very helpful, just learning about it. Each one is obviously different, right? And you want to get to the answer and get it as accurately as possible. So the idea of repeating versus trying out new ones, right? Do you suggest coming back to ones? Like, there's so many questions, or do you suggest just keeping on drilling until you get that accuracy high and, going ahead in that sense?
Both. I think you should keep covering new territory until you've covered all of the games. But I also think there's a lot to be gained from redoing games. Anything that gives you a lot of trouble, So we're going to end class today with one logic game, and just a little preview. I am going to solve it entirely making worlds. I'm not going to write down any of the rules. I'm just going to solve the puzzle with worlds. And I think for a lot of you, you're going to realize, oh, wow, this is a much better way of doing the games. But if what I do puzzles you, or if you have a hard time following it, you're not sure you could replicate it yourself, then you should definitely replicate it yourself, like right after class, potentially. You should just get out a fresh piece of scratch paper and try that game again and see if you can do what I did. If it was like medium difficulty, like you think you followed the steps, but you're not sure, maybe try the same game, try it tomorrow. If you thought it was easy, maybe try it again in a week. If you thought it was really easy, maybe you don't need to do it again because you're already beyond that level of difficulty. And there's no point, remastering stuff that you're already sure you've mastered. But generally speaking, with the logic games, yeah, the more difficult it was for you, the more you can probably benefit from redoing that game again sooner. And with the demon, it's nice because you can always just try the game until the point where you get totally stumped. When you're really frustrated and really blocked, then watch one of our videos, right? We've got multiple videos for every logic game that ever existed. If you don't want to watch me, you can watch Ben instead, but watch a little bit of the video until you get to where you're unstuck, then pause it again and keep working on it on your own. Because really, the best learning is going to come from you doing it by yourself. We're here to guide you. We're here to get you unstuck, but it's not useful for you to just watch like 1,000 videos of us doing game after game after game after game without you doing anything yourself. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, that definitely does. Really quick follow-up, because you said that this at the end. I have to unfortunately bounce in an hour because of work. But
No
how does this get uploaded? Like, would I be able to access the video today? Or
maybe not today, but tomorrow for sure. We upload all of our Demon Live classes probably within 24 hours. So if any of the class schedules don't work for you, you can always just watch them in arrears. And we do that at every level, by the way. So if you're a premium subscriber, you get access to my live class once a week. You can watch one recording of my live class per week. When you're a live subscriber, we have multiple classes every single day, which means you've got a whole, just big, thick chunk of fresh recorded content that's coming online every single day for you to watch. But yeah, we like to do these free events for our Demon Basic subscribers as well. Welcome, anybody who's in Demon Basic. Hi, thanks for being here. And anything that we give you access to live like this, then we're also going to give it to you in a recording. We understand that you can't maybe make the scheduled times, especially this one, which is right in the middle of a workday. Lonnie says, I'm working on comprehending the logical reasoning stimulus, and I guess you mean ordering games, Lonnie. We are going to be doing an ordering game today, and we will talk about some logical reasoning questions. We're going to do 2 easier logical reasoning questions and then do some reading comp, and then we're going to do a couple harder logical reasoning questions. So hopefully you'll make some progress on your goal of comprehending the stimulus and logical
And
reasoning.
what I meant by comprehending it is just by just using your advice, you and Ben's advice of actually reading and digging into that sentence and making that sentence your own, like trying to like, oh, this is, that conversation with yourself.
Yep.
Honestly, I've not gotten to a point to where I need to be, but that advice that you guys give has taken me to another level. Like I can start predicting some of the easier stimulus now because of that tidbit that you guys talk about all the time.
Thank you, Lonnie. I mean, the secret is, and I don't know why it's a secret, the LSAT is easy, y'all. It is easy. It makes perfect sense, but you do have to slow down enough to make sure that it's making sense one piece at a time. I think the biggest mistake that students make is they read too much too fast and they don't really digest it. So if you're having a hard time comprehending the logical reasoning stimulus, well, break it down. Start with the first sentence. And if the first sentence is really long, maybe stop halfway through that sentence. If they use a semicolon or a colon, or even if they use a comma, you can take a breath there and you can make sure you've understood that first little bit. Because if you don't understand that first little bit, then you're going to have a hard time understanding the next little bit. And then you're not going to have any clue at all what the next sentence is saying. Next thing you know, you've spent 30 seconds reading the stimulus, but you didn't really understand it. And then the typical student, of course, just, oh, well, I don't have time to really unpack, I can't reread it. I need to answer the question. And then they go into the question, they like read the question and the answer choices without having any idea what's going on. And that's just a complete waste of time. That's why you have low accuracy. It's also why you're so slow. It's because you went a little bit too fast in the beginning and just didn't really wrap your head around what you were reading, which that's not what lawyers do, y'all. Lawyers understand the things they read. So we need to slow down and just take it one bit at a time. You should feel that it's making more sense. When it makes more sense, then the questions get easier and easier because they really do. I promise you, they really do make perfect sense. Does that feel right, Lonnie? Okay. Let's see, we have a thank you. Sure. Yes, I'm glad you're making progress. Is it Taja or Tasha? How do I say that? I can't find you in the Zoom.
It is Tasha. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. And I'm very happy that you're making progress. We've rescued thousands of refugees from other prep companies over the years. I mean, this is not the first time I've ever heard this. It's like not the 100th time I've heard this. So welcome, happy to help. It makes perfect sense. And we love seeing that light bulb go on for people. So I'm glad to hear that you're making progress. Advice for older candidates. I think being an older candidate is actually an advantage. I think it's a differentiating factor. By the way, 33 is not old on any planet. 33 is a kid, basically. And you're competing with a bunch of like 21-year-olds in your application, which means you've got much more interesting stuff to write about in your personal statement. Your GPA is going to be slightly less of a factor. You should probably emphasize your professional experiences over the last 9 years and then get a really killer LSAT score. I think then the schools are going to be like, oh, well, she's a different person now than, 9 years ago. Look at everything that's been accomplished over these last 9 years. I really think it's an advantage. As far as studying for the LSAT is concerned, I don't think you have to do anything different. It's not like people sometimes get afraid, like, oh, I've been out of school for so long and I'm worried about competing with all these kids. But I don't think college does a particularly great job of training people for the LSAT. One thing college does is they give you like 900 pages of reading where you all skim like half of that and then go take your exam or go write your paper. I know that that's what everybody did in undergrad. So the LSAT is not susceptible to that type of thing. The LSAT is not about skimming. The LSAT is about actually understanding every single word. So I don't think you're at any disadvantage just because you haven't been in school for a while. Not where the LSAT is. In fact, it might be to your advantage that you've not been doing that type of
Thank you.
academia. You're
Yeah, I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Welcome. Mark, yeah, since we're right now in LSAT Flex world where they only do 3 sections on the official LSAT, I think you should probably be doing 3 section tests when you're practicing. I can't imagine doing 4 or 5 section tests to prepare for a 3 section exam. If we ever get away from the Flex and go back to the 5 section LSAT, then yeah, I would immediately switch and start prepping with 5 sections. But for now, I think you should do 3. All right, one last question, and then we're going to move on to our scheduled content. I want to try to stay on schedule today. I have a tendency to talk, as some of you have noticed. But Fatima wants to know about must-be true questions on logical reasoning. Fatima, we might cover one of them in today's agenda. We're going to get to that in just a second. But generally, the thing to remember about a must-be true question in logical reasoning is that the correct answer is no more than and no different from the facts on the page. So you have to understand the facts clearly, and then the correct answer is the one and only answer where you would be able to say, well, yes, Your Honor, this answer here is fully 100% proven by these facts on the page. Oh, it's right here, Your Honor. It says this and it says that. And because of that, this is the answer that I'm picking. And the 4 wrong answers are all going to be different or extra. So sometimes it'll just be a topic that wasn't even discussed in the fact pattern. Other times it'll be an answer that is kind of like what they were talking about, but they just crank up the volume too high. So it's real easy for them to create an attractive wrong answer by saying something that was generally correct, but then just amping it up to where it's more than what the facts actually justify. An example of this would be like, oh, I don't know. Mookie Betts is say the fact pattern was talking about how Mookie Betts is a great baseball player and he won the MVP, and he's going on about all his great skills, right? One of the answers, a wrong answer, might just be something like Mookie Betts is the best baseball player of all time. Something like that, where it's like, well, hey, they were going on and on and on about how great he is. They were telling you all about his amazing skills and whatnot. But we just because he's great doesn't mean he's the best of all time. And that's an easy way for them to write. Do you see how that answer, Fatima? Do you see how that's like on target, but then they just amped it up too high? And that makes it conclusively wrong. So we would rather have an answer. It's interesting because an answer that said Mookie Betts is not a shitty baseball player would actually be totally fine, because they were just telling you how great he is and how he has all these awesome skills and whatnot. So Mookie Betts is not shitty. Yeah, I mean, they just said how great he is. So you see how if they turn the volume down on an answer on a must be true question, it's actually more likely to be correct. It's easier to prove something weakly stated. But when they start stating he's the only baseball player you should care about, he's the greatest player of all time, that's when you have to be careful on a must be true, because it's just more than what the facts actually justify.
Thank
Follow all
you.
that?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for being here. This is super fun. If you're new in any of our live classes, all you have to do is try your best on the questions we give you. Really try to get them right, okay? I'm about to give you our first question for today. Really try to get it right. Don't hit the submit button until you think you've gotten it right. When you're ready for an explanation, all you got to do is just show me a thumbs up like this on camera, or you can do the reaction thing in Zoom. When I have like more than half of the class telling me they're ready to go, then I'll do an explanation for the question. And then the only other thing you have to do is just ask me questions. The LSAT makes perfect sense. I'm happy to explain to you how it makes perfect sense, but you have to tell me the parts that you don't understand so that we can reach that clarity together. Everybody good? All right, let's do it. We're going to dive in. This is our first easier logical reasoning question. Good luck. Let me know when you're ready for an explanation. I tend to do 2 recordings simultaneously when I'm teaching my classes. We record the Zoom, which gets posted to the LSAT Demon events, so you can watch the class afterward if you weren't able to come to class. I also record individual recordings for each of the questions that I explain, and that's because that's how we create the content for the Demon explanations, just so you know what I'm doing here. The first question is, sorry, now it's loading. All right, here we go. It's test J, section 2, question 1, and an economist tells us that every business strives to increase its productivity, comma, 4. So I want to go back to what Lonnie was talking about earlier today about trying to understand the stimulus in logical reasoning. I already know that the first thing that they have said here is their conclusion, or it's at least a conclusion. And the reason I know that is that usage of blah, 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 comma, and then the word for. For, since, and because, when used this way after a comma, indicate that the thing I said before was my conclusion, and now I'm going to give you a reason for that conclusion. So how do we know that every business strives to increase its productivity? They say, well, this increases profits for the owners and the likelihood that the business will survive. So they have concluded that every business does this, and they give you a reason why. The reason, of course, makes a lot of sense. Business owners want profits. Business owners want the business to survive. Of course, they will try to increase their productivity. because it's going to help their profits and help them survive. So there's a little bit of logic going on. Even in that first sentence, there's a conclusion and a premise for that conclusion. Now we have a but. But it says, not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. Why? Productivity seems useful. You just said that it helps increase profits and the likelihood that the business will survive. But you say some productivity measures aren't beneficial? Okay, I'm listening. Often, it says, attempts to increase productivity decrease the number of employees, which clearly harms the dismissed employees, as well as the sense of security of the retained employees. You might think I'm heartless for the first thing I'm going to say to that, which is, why does the business care about the dismissed employees? I mean, I don't really believe that in real life, but why is the well-being of the dismissed employee of any concern whatsoever to the ongoing business? We have dismissed them, so why do I care? Well, the second part of that, though, is going to kind of explain it to you, right? It hurts the sense of security of the retained employees. Now, I could also say, why do I care about the sense of security of retained employees? But I think we can all fill in the blank there, which is, well, maybe it's not good for the overall health of your business to have every employee constantly looking over their shoulder like, oh no, the boss is here, I'm about to get fired. That probably wouldn't be great for the business overall. Notice though that we're filling in that blank. It didn't actually say that, right? It just said, oh, it's going to hurt the sense of security of retained employees. So there is a missing piece in this argument. The objection that you could make here would be, well, wait a second, what if lower sense of security of the retained employees is actually good for my business? What if that's the exact point? What if I want them running scared? Running scared is one sure way to get them to run. If I want my employees to hustle, maybe I make them afraid that they're going to get fired all the time. So you can see how that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right, for the business. They left that out of their argument, which means that's where the lawyers are going to get involved and start fighting about things. Which one of the following most accurately expresses the main conclusion of the Economist's argument? Okay, so all of this analysis, by the way, takes me a lot longer to talk about it than it does to actually do all that. I naturally would have been flashing through those ideas as I was reading the argument. Turns out all they want to know is the main conclusion of the argument. Even though I spotted the very first line as a conclusion of the argument, it is not the main conclusion of the argument. If you wrapped all this up, why did they come here to talk to you today? What are they really trying to convince you of? The thing they really wanted to convince you of is that not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. As it turns out, the first sentence is kind of background. Every business does this because it's good for good for profits, and it's good for the likelihood that the business will survive. But, right, it's the not so fast is the thing that they really wanted to convince you of. And they said, not all of these efforts are beneficial because we have to decrease the number of employees sometimes. And when that happens, it harms the dismissed employee and, importantly, the sense of security of the retained employees, which they assume is bad for the business as a whole. So the conclusion of the argument, again, is not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. That's why they're wasting your time with this argument. That's what they wanted to convince you of. Heading into the answer choices, I have a very clear prediction. I always have a very clear prediction on main conclusion questions. If you can't predict the answer on a main conclusion question, you're in trouble because the answer choices are just going to rehash all the bits and pieces of the argument. If you can't tell me what the conclusion is without looking at the answer choices, I think you're at like a 50-50 at best to get the question correct. So again, I'm looking for not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. A says, if an action taken to secure the survival of a business fails to enhance, and there's no way in hell I would read any more of that answer choice. Okay, I expect answer choices to be wrong. Every answer choice has an 80% chance of being wrong. A was not what I was looking for. It was too broad. It was about every action taken to secure the survival of a business. That's not what they were talking about. They were only talking about productivity measures, not every single action taken to secure a business. I hated the first half of A, which means I don't have to read the second half of A. B, some measures taken by a business to increase productivity fail to be beneficial to the business as a whole. I was looking for not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. B has an identical meaning to exactly what I was predicting. And the answer here is going to be B. Now I'll just skim through C, D, and E and find reasons to get rid of them. C, only if the employees of a business are also its owners. Oh my God, is that not at all what they were talking about? I do not need to read anything about owner employees. That's not what the facts were about, y'all. And so that's another one that's just real easy to dismiss. See what I'm doing? I'm taking more time with the argument so that I can take less time with the wrong answer choices. D, there is no business that does not make efforts to increase its productivity. That was a premise of the argument. That was the first thing they said. Well, actually, that was a conclusion of the argument because of the way they used the word for, but that's not their main conclusion. They weren't here just trying to prove to you that every business takes productivity measures. That was not their point. They said every business takes productivity measures, but some of them fail because, and then they gave you reasons. And it was the part about productivity measures failing that they really wanted to convince you of. D was certainly part of the argument, but it was not the main conclusion. E, decreasing the number of employees in a business undermines the sense of security of retained employees. That was a premise in support of the conclusion that not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. My answer here is B, because it's the one that matches my prediction, and that's how you do a main conclusion question. How's everybody feeling about that? Sometimes I get a little heavy-handed with the easy explanations, but that's because everyone has to get the easy ones right, okay? We're gonna get the bulk of our points on the easiest questions. So we need to make sure that we understand the easy ones backward and forward so that we can quickly dismiss wrong answer choices, right? Anybody in here who's scoring 165 or higher, and I know that some of you are here, anyone who's scoring 165 or higher did exactly what I did reading A and reading C, which was you read the first little bit of it and you're just like, absolutely not. That's the only way you're going to get anywhere close to 170 is by seriously disrespecting the wrong answer choices. One good way to do that is by predicting the correct answer. All right, let's do another one. Good luck. All right, here we go. Matching pattern questions tend to be intimidated. Was anybody intimidated by this question right off the bat? Just looking at how long those answer choices were? That's pretty common, but turns out that this is an easy question, guys. It's test J, section 2, question 2. All Labrador retrievers bark a great deal. Okay, that sounds like a premise. If you say so, every lab has to bark a lot. All Saint Bernards bark infrequently. This might seem obvious to you, but if all labs bark and no Saint Bernard barks, that means that no lab is a Saint Bernard, and it means that no Saint Bernard is a lab. Little formal logic stuff for you there, but you can't both bark infrequently and never, or bark all the time and bark infrequently. It's just not possible. So we can infer that Saint Bernards and labs can't be the same thing. All right, each of Rosa's dog is a cross between a Labrador Retriever and a Saint Bernard. Okay, so now we're talking about something different here, right? You can't be purely a lab and purely a Saint Bernard at the same time, because then you would have to bark a lot and bark infrequently, which makes no sense. But can we have a cross between those two? Sure, we can. What about it now? I immediately am thinking, I have no idea how much Rosa's dogs will bark at this point, because once you're a cross between a lab and a Saint Bernard, you are no longer just a lab and just a Saint Bernard. You no longer have to have the characteristics of a lab or a Saint Bernard. The conclusion of this argument says, therefore, Rosa's dogs are moderate barkers. And that's absurd. That's ridiculous logic. You don't just average out the qualities of two things when you blend them together. You know, it's like saying coffee keeps you awake and melatonin puts you to sleep. So if you drink coffee with melatonin in it, you will be like halfway in between awake and asleep. Maybe that's true in real life, but it's certainly not logically proven. Right? We don't know that that has to be true. What did I see recently? Oh, Phil Mickelson is playing in a golf match with Charles Barkley as his partner. Phil Mickelson is a professional golfer. Charles Barkley is absolute trash at golf. But you don't get to say, therefore, their team is going to be like, okay. I mean, their team could be great or their team could be trash. I don't know which one of them is going to be the controlling factor in that golf match. Phil's pretty damn good. He could just carry Charles Barkley, or Charles Barkley could be so terrible that he brings Phil down to his awful level. I don't know which one of those two things is going to happen. All right, so you see what type of thing would be the correct answer. This question is asking us to find flawed reasoning that matches the given argument. I jumped all over this argument about Rosa's dogs. I know for sure what the flaw is. That's step one. If you don't know why the argument about Rosa's dogs is flawed, then you have no chance going and trying to match the flaw. All right? So on this type of a question, if they're asking you to match the flaw, if you don't know the flaw, you need to reread the argument. By the way, you should have spotted the flaw on your first time through the argument if you were being critical enough of these arguments, which you really should be. You should be looking to call bullshit always on these arguments. A, all students who study diligently make good grades, but some students who don't study diligently also make good grades. I wouldn't need to read any more of that because I wanted all students who study diligently make good grades. And then I wanted all students who don't study diligently don't make good grades. I didn't want this some, and I didn't want some people with different characteristics also making good grades. That's not anything like the argument about Rosa's dogs. B, all type A chemicals are extremely toxic to human beings. All type B chemicals are non-toxic to human beings. Okay, I can predict what the rest of this answer should say if it's going to be the correct answer. I want it to continue with, hey, if we pour 50-50 chemical A and chemical B, then it's going to be like, you know, moderately toxic to human beings. If that's what they said, then this is the answer. It says, this household cleaner is a mixture of type A and type B. Therefore, it's moderately toxic. Perfect. That's exactly the answer. It would take me about 5 seconds to dismiss the rest of these wrong answers. Let's see. C, all students at Hanson School live in Greene County. All students at Edwards School live in Wynn County. I mean, this is going to be real weird now. In order for this to be the correct answer, it's going to be like, so if you go to both Hanson and Edwards, then you live on the border between, like your house is on the border between these two counties or something like that. It says, therefore, oh, sorry, members of the Perry family attend both Hanson and Edwards. Therefore, some members of the Perry family live in Greene County and some live in Wynn County. The reason why that's not the answer is that that's not even flawed. If the two premises there are true, and if some members of the Greene family, attend each of these two schools, well then yeah, some members of them have to live in each of these two Perry family, not the Greene family, the Perry family. You get my point. C is not even flawed. If it's not flawed, it can't be the answer to a matching flaw question. D, all transcriptionists know shorthand, all engineers know calculus. Bob has worked as both a transcriptionist and an engineer. Therefore, Bob knows both shorthand and calculus. I don't think that's flawed either. At least while he had those jobs, he did have to know those things. Now, it could be that he was a transcriptionist 20 years ago and he forgot the shorthand. Maybe D's flawed for that reason, but it's not the blending flaw that I was looking for. So the answer is not D. E, all of Kenisha's dresses are very well made. All of Connie's dresses are very badly made. Half of the dresses in this closet are very well made and half of them are very badly made. This has nothing to do with what I was looking for. I was looking for, so if a dress belongs to both Kenisha, you know, or if it's like they share the dress, half of the time Kenisha owns it and half the time Connie owns it, but that's just not what it's saying. E is wrong when it says, therefore, half the dresses in this closet are Kenisha's and half of them are Connie's. Can somebody tell me the flaw that this argument is committing? There's a name for it. I only have names for like maybe 5 different flaws, but I have a name for that one. Somebody want to tell me? Give you a hint, it's the LSAT's most common flaw.
Sufficient, necessary.
Yeah, it's confusing, sufficient for necessary. Thanks, Lonnie. Thanks, Billy. Yeah, I get it. All of Kenisha's dresses are well made and all of Connie's dresses are very badly made. But just because a certain closet has half badly made and half well made does not mean that they have to belong to Connie and Kenisha. They could belong to literally any other human on the planet. Yeah, if it belongs to Kenisha, it has to be well made, but that does not mean that a well-made dress belongs to Kenisha. That's confusing, sufficient for necessary. It's the LSAT's most common flaw. Wasn't the flaw I was looking for here, so it's really easy to dismiss E. The answer is B, because it perfectly matches the flawed pattern of the given argument, and it perfectly matches the prediction that I made as well. Everybody good? All right, we're going to move on to reading comprehension. And for those of you who are joining us late, by the way, the syllabus is right here in the chat. These syllabi are always posted in advance. So if you're an accommodated student, or if you just want extra time to work on the questions on your own without the pressure, you can always log on to these syllabi in advance and do the questions way ahead of time. We're going to move on now to some reading comprehension, and the passage is here if you want to click on that and follow along. The way we do reading comp in Demon Live is I'm going to read you the passage, and I'm going to demonstrate to you what it's like to really get in there and engage with the passage. Once I've read the passage to you, I'm going to turn you guys loose on answering the questions, and then I'll explain whichever ones gave you guys the hardest time. Okay? All right. Felicia says her camera's going to be off for a couple minutes. That's totally fine. It does not hurt my feelings if you have distractions in the background and you want to turn off your camera a little bit. I get it. That's totally fine. You don't ever have to explain to me why you showed up late, why you left early, why you turned your cameras on and off for a little while. This is why online LSAT education is better than live classroom education. It really is better. You guys are all adults and you can maintain responsibility for yourselves. And so if you have to dip in and out, that's totally fine. It's much more efficient to study this way. I'm happy we're doing this on Zoom. And so, yeah, I like it if you can turn your camera on most of the time, but even, maybe your camera is broken. Maybe you're at work. There's a lot of reasons why you would have it off. So thank you for that. All right, here comes the reading comp for this class. It's Test J, Passage 1, story time. Sit back and relax. Enjoy as I read you this passage from the law school admission test. It says, for decades, there has been a deep rift between poetry and fiction in the United States, especially in academic settings. If you say so, semicolon, I guess you're going to tell me now about this rift between poetry and fiction in academic settings. Graduate writing programs in universities, for example, train students as poets or as writers of fiction, but almost never as both. Okay, that is a good example of this rift. Both poets and writers of fiction have tended to support this separation, in large part because the current conventional wisdom holds that poetry should be elliptical and lyrical, reflecting inner states and processes of thought or feeling, whereas character and narrative events, like story, are the stock in trade of fiction. Okay, so the first paragraph has told us about this rift enforced by academia and also by the writers and poets themselves, fiction writers and poets themselves. Poetry is supposed to be, it's like this conventional wisdom among even poets and writers of fiction, that poetry is supposed to be meandering and lyrical and elliptical, and then fiction is supposed to be, oh, no, we're going to tell you about characters, and those characters are going to go into a story. And these are two separate realms. At the end of the first paragraph, I don't like take notes or underline or highlight or diagram or anything like that, but I do think about where they might go next, right? They've told us about a rift. Are they going to tell us that this rift is good? Are they going to tell us that this rift is bad? Are they going to tell us that the rift needs to be closed? Are they going to tell us that the rift should be widened? I don't really know where they're going. They seem pretty even-handed about it. I guess I might predict that they're going to say it's bad, though. Maybe the word rift indicates something negative. Making little predictions as we go is one of our best strategies for reading comprehension. If you can't predict where they're going to go next, then maybe you didn't read it well enough, what you've read so far. So I'm always making little predictions about where they're going to go next. And I'm thinking, well, maybe you're going to tell me that this rift is bad and we should close the rift. Second paragraph. Certainly it is true that poetry and fiction are distinct genres, but why have specialized education and literary territoriality resulted from this distinction? So they grant that poetry and fiction are different. But then they ask basically a rhetorical question: why does this rift between in academia and in literary practice, why does this rift really exist? The answer lies perhaps in a widespread attitude in US culture, which often casts a suspicious eye on the generalist. Those with knowledge and expertise in multiple areas risk charges of dilettantism, as if ability in one field is diluted or compromised by accomplishment in another. I'm an LSAT specialist. And so I do have to admit that I might sort of judge people who teach LSAT and GRE and GMAT and SAT and ACT and like little kids math, how can you be an expert in all of those things at once? I don't think it's just because I'm an American that I have this judgment, but at least I understand what they're saying, right? Like, yeah, I can see how you could be jack of all trades, but master of none. I get that. Fortunately, it says, okay, now the word fortunately has to jump off the page at you here if you're doing it right, because they didn't need to make this judgment that they're about to make. So far, it's been fact, 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 fact. Now, all of a sudden, the author clearly shows you their opinion with the word fortunately. What is so fortunate? What is this thing that you like so much? Well, there are signs that the bias against writers who cross generic boundaries is diminishing. So I predicted, maybe you think this rift is bad. And the first sentence of the third paragraph clearly supports my prediction that, yeah, you're saying it's fortunate that this rift is closing. So you think the rift is bad. One important example of this trend is Rita Dove, an African-American writer highly acclaimed for both her poetry and her fiction. Okay, so here's somebody crossing the boundaries. And the author says that this is fortunate that it's happening, and Rita Dove is an important example of this trend. A few years ago, speaking at a conference entitled Poets Who Write Fiction, Dove expressed gentle incredulity about the habit of segregating the genres. Credulous is the exact opposite of how I want you to be on the LSAT. Okay, I want you to be incredulous about basically everything you read. Credulous is an insult. Credulous is like, oh, well, it says right here on the page, therefore that just has to be a fact. I want you to be incredulous. Rita Dove here, she's being gentle about it. She sounds like a sweetheart, but she's being incredulous about this habit of segregating the genres. So she's basically like, really? Why? What? Why do we have to have poets and then fiction writers? That's gentle incredulity. She had grown up reading and loving both fiction and poetry, she said, unaware of any purported danger lurking in attempts to mix the two. She also studied for some time in Germany, where, she observes, poets write plays, novelists compose libretti, playwrights write novels. They would not understand our restrictiveness. So she's giving an example in Germany of people crossing the boundaries in a way that in the United States, at least, it hasn't been common at all. All right, last paragraph. It makes little sense, Dove believes, to persist in the restrictive approach to poetry and fiction prevalent in the US, because each genre shares in the nature of the other. So Rita Dove, this important example of someone who crosses the boundaries in her own work, is also out there at these conferences or whatnot, pointing out, hey, there's lots of similarities between poetry and fiction. Now, I don't know what those are, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going to come next. Indeed, her poetry offers example after example of what can only be properly regarded as lyric narrative. So her poetry, her poems have story in them. So her poems are crossing the boundaries by including story. Her use of language in these poems is undeniably lyrical. That is, it evokes emotion and inner states without requiring the reader to organize ideas or events in a particular linear structure, which is how poetry was supposed to be, right? Poetry has been traditionally thought of as this lyrical elliptical thing. The language she's using is lyrical and elliptical, but it's also including story. Yet this lyric expression simultaneously presents the elements of a plot in such a way that the reader is led repeatedly to take account of clusters of narrative details within the lyric flow. That's just doubling down on the idea that her poetry includes story elements. Thus, while the language is lyrical, it often comes to constitute cumulatively a work of narrative fiction. Great. That feels to me like it said the same thing 5 times. I'm kind of going like, yeah, I get it. But that's part of how this should feel. If you're doing it right, By the time you get to the end of the passage, you should be like, yeah, I'm tuned in. I know where you're going. I can see what you're doing here. I get it. We're going to go slower probably at the beginning of the passage so that we might be able to go a little bit faster at the end of the passage. Similarly, many passages in her fiction, though undeniably prose, that is not poetry, but prose, achieve the status of lyric narrative through the use of poetic rhythms and elliptical expression. So they had just said her poetry contains story, which was supposed to be the domain of fiction, at least as long as we have this rift. And then they say, not only that, but her fiction includes elliptical styles in a way that evokes poetry. So her fiction has elements of poetry, her poetry has elements of fiction. Rita Dove is a real important example of someone who's closing this rift, which the author thinks is fortunate. In short, Dove bridges the gap between poetry and fiction, not only by writing in both genres, but also by fusing the two genres within individual works. So she does do works that are separate, but then she does also do poems that have story elements and stories that have poem elements, and she's crossing the divide. All right, you guys tackle the questions. All you got to do is just dump the ones that bother you, the number of the questions that bother you, just put those numbers into the chat, and I'll have time to do a couple of the ones that bother you guys the most. I'll give you about 5 minutes. Looks like the one that caused the most people problems was number 7. So I'll go ahead and do an explanation for that one now. Test J, passage 1, question 7. It can be inferred from the passage that the author would be most likely to believe which one of the following. Right away, I think I'm not going to infer anything, and I am not going to speculate about what the author would believe. I'm going to pick an answer that is based on the passage. It says inferred from the passage. From the passage is the important part here. Lots of students will miss this question because they think, oh no, I'm supposed to infer something that wasn't stated. Infer just means must be true. So I'm not looking to really infer anything. I'm looking for something that has to be true because that's what it said in the passage. So what did the passage say? A, each of Dove's works can be classified as either primarily poetry or primarily fiction, even though it may contain elements of both. I can see why you might not have liked that answer, but that answer is correct because there is evidence. I think it came up late in the passage. Let's see, line 40-ish. So that's the middle of the last paragraph, or sorry, the beginning of the last paragraph says that her poetry offers example after example of lyric narrative. That is talking about her poetry as its own separate thing, right? So with her work, it's not like it's all just one muddy thing and you can't really tell whether it's poetry or tell whether it's fiction. Remember, the whole point was Rita Dove's poetry has elements of fiction and her fiction has elements of poetry. Well, the author is classifying her work as either fiction or poetry, but it has elements of both. Yeah, at the end of the passage, it is where it talks about her fiction. So many passages in her fiction achieve the status of lyric narrative, blah, blah, blah. So she does write in both genres, but she fuses those genres within individual works, even though most of them can be classified as one or the other. So it's the whole last paragraph, really, that's my justification for A. Now let me see if I can get rid of B, C, D, and E. B says, the aesthetic value of lyric narrative resides in its representation of a sequence of events rather than in its ability to evoke inner states. What? I thought it was both. I mean, lyric narrative is when we're fusing the two genres together. So it's going to have lyric elements, but it's also going to have narrative elements, which means that it's going to be, I guess, aesthetically pleasing, both because it is representing events and because it is evoking inner states. I don't have any evidence to pick B. C, the way in which Dove blends genres in her writing is without precedent. Too strong. That's a perfect example of an answer where they said she was important. They said she was crossing these boundaries, which are not commonly crossed. They didn't say she's the first one in history to do this, and that's why we cannot pick C. You know, matter of fact, aren't people in Germany doing it all the time? Without precedent would mean without precedent anywhere. Even if she's the very first American to do it, if there's people in Europe who are doing it before her, that makes C wrong. We can't pick C. D says, narrative that uses lyrical language is generally aesthetically superior to pure lyric poetry. What? Where's your evidence for that? This author thinks it's fortunate that people are out there crossing this divide. This author didn't say that lyric narrative is better than pure poetry. I have no evidence for D. E, writers who successfully cross the generic boundary between poetry and fiction often try their hand at genres such as drama as well, which is purely skeptical. Drama was never mentioned anywhere in this passage at all. I'll tell you one thing they're never asking you to do on the reading comp. They are never asking you to make shit up. And if you picked E, you're making shit up. That is not what was in the passage. They're not asking you for your opinion. They're not asking you to read the tea leaves. They're asking whether you comprehended what you read, and A is the only one that matches what you read. B, C, D, and E are conclusively not what you read. The answer here is A. We have to kind of keep it moving. So I'm going to refer Tara and Felicia. Thank you for asking about number 3 and number 8. Those questions are already explained in the daemon. Whenever you hit submit on a reading comprehension passage, the explanations will start popping up. You'll have on the left-hand side there, you see the help for every single one of the questions. All you got to do is click on that and you'll see either a video or a written explanation, or in many cases, both. Okay, so if any of my explanations are unclear, just use the ask button. There's a bright orange ask button in the upper right-hand corner of the daemon right now. Click that ask button and our team of writers will get back to you as soon as possible. We've already got explanations for all these questions and we do need to try to keep on track. So I'm going to move forward. Eden is here. Eden is a TA for me sometimes in classes. Hi, Eden. Can we have that? There it is. First harder logical reasoning question. Give you about 2 minutes to work on it. Just let me know when you're ready for an explanation. Thanks. Okay, these will be a couple slightly harder LR questions. Test J, section 2, question 24. Car companies solicit consumer information on such human factors as whether a seat is comfortable or whether a set of controls is easy to use. Those are not the only things The such as means here's a couple examples of the kinds of things that car companies are going to solicit consumer information on. Not the only things, but the kinds of things. However, designer interaction with consumers is superior to survey data. That's a real weird use of however, because they never told me how they were soliciting the data in the first place. I mean, I was curious, like, well, are you talking to customers individually, or are you sending out surveys, or are you doing focus groups, or are you putting a secret camera on them and watching how they interact with the car? I didn't know. So this, however, strikes me as kind of strange. But anyway, it says that designer interaction with consumers is better than a survey. So actually send the designers out there, let them talk to the drivers. That's better than just sending out a survey. The data may tell the designer why a feature on last year's model was given a low rating, but data will not explain how that feature needs to be changed in order to receive a higher rating. Okay, if you say so. So what it sounds like is, you know, if you survey the customers, they're going to be like, well, I hate the seat. The seat sucks. The seat's uncomfortable. Okay, so we know they don't like the seat. But they say it's better to send the designer out there to actually work with the driver, because in that case, it's like, oh, the seat sucks. And the designer looks at it and goes, oh, well, what if we raised it up 2 inches? Or, oh, what if we put in a heated massager? Or, oh, what if we, you know, whatever. And then the designer can actually learn what would make the consumer more happy. All right, that's what I got. What kind of question is this? The reasoning above conforms most closely to which one of the following propositions? Conforms most closely to which one of the following propositions is really just a supported question or a must be true question. Kara says principle. Kara, there is no such thing as a principle question. I went on about a 15-minute rant yesterday in my office hours about how there is no such thing as a principle question. You're going to make your life a lot easier if you forget about principle questions entirely. They are either asking you to support reasoning that was given, or they're asking you to find a principle that is supported by the reasoning given, but they are never asking you just for a principle. It's either going to be a strengthen question or a must be true type of a question. And so principle questions, it's a sure sign that the teacher you're working with has no idea what they're talking about on the LSAT. When they start going on about principle questions, you can just go ahead and unsubscribe. All right, the reasoning above conforms most closely to which one of the following propositions? I think it's a supported question. I'm looking for something, you know, I'm looking for something conservative here. I'm looking for like, hey, this example sure seems to demonstrate this thing right here. I think it's top down, and I'm not looking for anything extra. I'm just looking for something that like seems supported by the information that we were given. Conforms most closely. Okay, that makes me think I want something narrowly tailored. I don't want something big and bold. I want something narrowly tailored, supported clearly by the information that was given. So A says, getting consumer input for design modifications can contribute to successful product design. There's one word there that I absolutely love if this is a must be true question or a supported question, which I think it is. What's the one word that your teacher loves? Lonnie, winner. Nicole, winner. Can, the word can. I love that word. If I'm looking for something conservatively stated, if I'm looking for something that's easy to prove, can just means, hey, all it has to have happened is one time. If it happens one time, then it can happen. So when I read the can in A, I'm like, well, I mean, you just told me about how sending the designer out to work with drivers can result in better information. Therefore, A is 100% supported by the facts that we were given. I love A. B, car companies traditionally conduct extensive post-market surveys. There's one word there. Actually, there's a couple words there that I hate. What are the words that I hate there if this is a must be true question? 2 words there that I hate in B. Yep, I hate extensive. I didn't notice the traditionally. I don't really care about traditionally. Yeah, post-market is the word that I really hate there, because I know that they are getting consumer information, but as far as I know, they might be doing that in the lab before the car ever reaches the market. I mean, I assume that that's what they would do. That's a lot smarter than just getting the post-market surveys, right? So post-market is too specific and not supported by these facts. I also hated extensive because it's like turning up the volume too high. I know that they do some research. I don't know if they do extensive research. I got 2 reasons to hate B. C, designers aim to create features that will appeal to specific market niches. That's a bad answer. It's almost certain to be true in real life, but they are not asking you for your opinion or your knowledge of the car industry or anything like that. Sure, I'm pretty sure designers do try to go for specific market niches. But that's not what these facts were about. So it's not, C does not conform closely to the facts we were given. D, a car will have unappealing features if consumers are not consulted during its design stage. I know that designers, if they talk to consumers, get better information. Unappealing features was never mentioned. Where does it say unappealing features? Never said that the seat was unappealing, never said that the controls were unappealing. We were talking about preferences, but unappealing? Why do we have to? Also, it didn't say that designers have to consult with consumers during the design stage. Maybe it is all post-market. Maybe the designers, maybe they put cars out into the market, and then the designers go out there and talk to the consumers and figure out what they like and what they don't like. And, oh, it would have been better like this. It would have been better like that. And then they go back into the lab and design a completely new car. I don't have justification for cars are going to have unappealing features if the designers aren't consulted during the design phase. D's wrong because it's way too specific in a couple of different ways, and it's just hard for me to prove it. I can prove A beyond a shadow of a doubt. Can it contribute? Well, yeah, look at the facts. The whole thing with unappealing features and during the design phase make D wrong. E, consumer input affects external rather than internal design components of cars. You might have thought, well, yeah, the seat's inside the car and the controls are inside the car. But those were only examples of the types of things that car companies solicit information on. They might also solicit information on the tires and the spoiler and the headlights. Just because they only were talking about 2 examples that happen to be internal features does not give me justification to pick E. The answer here is A because it's the easiest one to prove. We have it listed as a supported question, which I think is correct. Even if this was a must be true question, I think I could still pick A because I mean, the facts justify A. You can't argue with A. If the facts are the facts, you can't argue with A. I can argue with B, C, D, and E. That's why none of them are correct for this supported question. When you see a question that talks about principles or propositions, just remember there's no such thing as a principle question. Are they asking me to support an argument that was given, or are they asking me to find an answer that is supported by the argument that was given? Cool. All right, here's our second harder logical reasoning question. Have fun. I'm getting a little bit of background noise, so whoever that is, if you could just be careful, please, with your microphone. Thank you very much. Here's the hardest second LR, harder LR, sorry. Test J, section 2, question 25. During the 19th century, the French Academy of Art was a major financial sponsor of painting and sculpture in France. Okay, that's nice of them. Sponsorship by private individuals had decreased dramatically by this time. Okay, if you say so. Fun facts about how art was sponsored in the 19th century in France. Because the Academy discouraged innovation in the arts, there was little innovation in 19th century French sculpture. That sounds bad. Yet 19th century French painting showed a remarkable degree of innovation. I feel a paradox question here. I can almost always predict a paradox question. Let me just glance at the question stem real quick. Which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain the difference between the innovation in French painting and the innovation in French sculpture during the 19th century? Yep. It's a good sign that you're tuned in properly to logical reasoning if you're able to recognize, based on those facts, you go, oh, that's strange. Oh, I wonder if this is going to turn out to be a paradox question. Sure enough, it's a paradox question. I have understood the mystery. On a paradox question, that's definitely step one. What's the mystery? Well, you see, private individuals are dramatically funding art less. The French Academy of Art is a major financial sponsor of painting and sculpture. This academy discourages innovation in the arts, which bad on them. They're supposed to be this Academy of Art, but they don't like innovation. All right. Good that you're funding art. Bad that you don't want innovation in art. That's lame, at least in my opinion. Why did it impact the innovation in sculpture a lot without impacting the innovation in painting? I don't know. My first thought is something like, well, maybe there was a Swiss Academy of Art. Maybe the Swiss Academy of Art was secretly funneling money to innovative French painters. Now, that's wildly speculative, and it's almost certainly not going to be the answer. I mean, it is not going to be the answer. The correct answer here is not going to randomly happen to say Switzerland, but it could. It totally could. If there was an answer that said, oh yeah, there was in Basel, Switzerland, there was this Academy of Art and they really loved innovation in painting and they were like dumping money on French painters who were innovative, but not sculptors, then that would explain how this situation where private individuals in France aren't funding art anymore, the Academy of Art is funding art in these areas, painting and sculpture. They don't like innovation. The sculptors are like, yeah, okay, we're not going to innovate, but the painters keep innovating because they're getting their money from somewhere else. That could be across the border with Switzerland, or it could be in any other way. That would be one possible type of correct answer. Another good answer would be something like French painters loved being poor. How about that? French painters were like, nah, F you, Academy of Art. I'm going to just keep making whatever I want to make. And if you want to cut off my funding, good. Good. I like being poor. Some people do like being poor. Saints mostly like being poor. Maybe these painters were saints and they don't care about the funding. Maybe the sculptors were like, no, I got to pay the bills, so I'm going to do what you want me to do. All right, I've got two different predictions. Those are different types of predictions. Notice that the question stem says which one, if true, most helps to explain. So unlike the top-down question we just did, where we're supposed to pick an answer that is justified by the facts on the page, this one's a bottom-up type of a question. Which one, if it's true, is going to change our understanding of the facts? It's going to explain this weird paradox. Okay, so as I go into the answer choices, I'm not going to dismiss an answer because I think it's false. I have to assume that the answer is true. And then the analysis becomes, well, does it satisfy this mystery about why French painters in the 19th century behave differently from French sculptures in the 19th century? Totally different type of analysis when I go through the answer choices. It's useful to be thinking about, is this a top-down question or is this a bottom-up question? I talked about that a lot in my office hours yesterday as well. A, in France in the 19th century, the French Academy gave more of its financial support to painting than it did to sculpture. That actually makes it harder to understand. For me, if the whole point here is the Academy is doing the funding, the Academy doesn't like innovation, why did the sculptors lack innovation and the painters still kept innovating? Saying, oh yeah, the Academy gave more money to the painters, that doesn't seem to make sense. Why were they giving them the money if they kept innovating? Why did the sculptors stop innovating if they weren't even getting the money? So I don't see how A explains anything. If any, I think really A makes it harder to understand. B, the French Academy in the 19th century financially supported a greater number of sculptors than painters, but individual painters received more support on average than individual sculptors. That doesn't explain anything. If the individual painters were getting more than the individual sculptors, how does that explain why the painters kept innovating and the sculptors didn't? It's got to click, y'all. The correct answer is going to stand on its own without a lot of additional explanation. The correct answer is going to be like, oh yeah, well here, this makes it make sense. C, because stone was so much more expensive than paint and canvas, far more unsponsored paintings were produced than were unsponsored sculptures in France during the 19th century. That's going to turn out to be the correct answer. And I want to point out here that it's actually kind of similar to my second prediction. My second prediction was weird. My second prediction was, what if painters like being poor? Well, you know, C kind of says that. C's like, well, it's real expensive to get the material to do sculptures. You don't have a choice basically to be a sculptor without money. You need money to fund your sculpting, but painters don't care. Anybody can paint, you know, get some paint and get a wall and start painting. And because of that, if C is true, that you can do painting without the funding, well then yeah, the fact that all the funding was coming from some weird academy that doesn't like innovation, that might have less effect on painters who don't need money to paint than it would on sculptors who need money to sculpt. C is a perfect explanation. That's going to be the answer. D, very few of the artists in France in the 19th century who produced sculptures also produced paintings. I don't care about people who practice in both genres. How does that explain why one type of artist behaved differently from another type of artist? D's like, well, some people did both. Okay, great. That's nice, but that doesn't explain anything. E, although the Academy was the primary sponsor of sculpture and painting, the total amount of financial support that French sculptors and painters received from sponsors declined during the 19th century. That doesn't do anything. E says, oh, everybody was getting less money. Okay, what about it? Everybody's getting less money, therefore the painters kept innovating while the sculptors didn't? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't explain anything. I understood the mystery, which was a difference in behavior between painters and sculptors under certain circumstances. C, if true, is the one that makes it click. It's the one that explains why the two different types of artists behaved differently under these circumstances. All right, how are we feeling about that? Remember, thanks y'all for having your cameras on. The more your cameras are on, the better I can interact with you. Also, it's a little bit of accountability for you. You can't be goofing off or, you know, on swiping on Tinder or whatever while you're in class if you have your camera on. So please try to keep your cameras on whenever you can. I would like to also point out that on the Lsat Flex, your camera is going to be on. You're going to have that stupid green light staring you in the face. I mean, unless you covered it up or something. that camera is going to be on during the test. And so when you're studying with us in the Demon, when you're doing your timed sections, when you're doing your practice tests, if you come to any of our events, you should try to leave those cameras on for your benefit. It also benefits us as teachers. Okay. Logic game is already in the chat. I'll give you, we're doing pretty good on time, so I'll probably give you 8-10 minutes. I'll give you a challenge. Solve the entire game without writing down any of the rules, okay? I'm gonna bake my rules into solutions. I call those worlds. I'm gonna solve the puzzle instead of slavishly writing down the first rule and then writing down the second rule and then writing down the third rule. That's some old school Lsat dogma way of doing the games. And I think we can do this game without ever writing down any of the rules. All right, good luck. I'll give you about 10 minutes. Thanks.
Wait, so are you
Claudia?
saying that we should start going through the question without writing anything down?
No,
or
not,
are you
no,
saying
no,
I could write some stuff, some worlds down first and
Yes.
then approach?
Thank you for clarifying, Claudia. What I mean is read the setup and all of the rules and then make a picture. But that picture does not have to be rule 1, rule 2, rule 3. Instead, I want you to bake those rules into a solution for the game. Okay? All right. All right, let's dive in. My challenge here was don't write down each individual answer, rather bake those each individual rule, rather bake those rules into worlds to just go ahead and solve the puzzle so that you don't have to process the rules anymore. The purpose for making worlds is to eliminate rules. We don't like having multiple rules that we have to continue to process over and over and over. If we can, we want to look for ways that we can process those rules once into a limited set of solutions or worlds so that we don't have to continue to think about that rule forever. I'm going to show you what I mean. This is test J, the first logic game. A company is generating a series of 5-digit product codes in accordance with the following rules. First rule says you can only use 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is 5 different digits. And you're going to use 5 digits in the code. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 are the only digits that are available. Each digit occurs exactly once in any code, which means we're going to have to use one of each of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because these are 5-digit codes. Put the first two together, and you realize that all we're doing here is we're going to put the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in some order, and that's going to be a product code. Okay. The second digit, it says, has a value exactly twice of the first. Now, don't be afraid. You are going to have to use math that you learned in 2nd grade at this point, okay? This is about as mathy as the Lsat ever gets, but you do need to understand how multiplication works. And if our only choices are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the second digit has to be exactly twice the first, how many different ways are there that we can do that? Nicole says 2 ways. Taja says 2 ways. There are 2 ways for just the first 2 codes. There are the 2 digits in the code. There are 2 ways that we can make the second digit be exactly twice the first. So now, without worrying about the 3rd digit and the 5th digit, the next rule, I'm going to leave that aside for just a second. I'm going to make 2 worlds here based on the 3rd rule. If the second digit has to be exactly twice the first, then there are only 2 ways to do that. Those first 2 digits must be 1 and 2, or 2 and 4. Those are the only 2 ways to start our product codes. Remember, the second digit has to be exactly twice the first. 3 is not exactly twice any of these other numbers. 0 is not twice any of these other numbers, and twice 0 is 0. So 0 and 3 ain't making it into the first 2 digits in the code. To satisfy the 3rd rule, the first 2 digits must be 1 and 2 or 2 and 4. And now I have baked that rule into my solution, and I never have to think about that again. As long as every product code starts looking like this or like this, I can't break the rule. If I can't break the rule, then I don't have to think about the rule anymore. The purpose of making worlds is to eliminate rules. I'm going to do an easier version of this game from here because I no longer have to keep processing that 3rd rule. Now, can I do that again with this 4th rule? Remember, I have to always start in this template or in this template. How does that 4th rule apply? It says that the 3rd digit has to be less than the 5th digit. So let me think about that now. In the world where I start 1 and 2, what are my remaining 3 digits? 0, 3, and 4. Okay. The 5th digit has to be more than the 3rd digit. I've only got 0, 3, and 4 left. I can infer right away that this digit has to be 0 or 3. Can't be 4 because 4 is the highest digit. The 5th digit has to be higher than the 3rd digit. So this can't be 4. This has to be 0 or 3. And I could leave that there and I could start drawing some arrows about the 5th spot has to be less than the 3rd spot. But again, I think I can just make worlds or split the worlds I already have so that I don't have to continue to process the 5th digit has to be higher than the 3rd. So let me just demonstrate. There's a lot of different ways you can go from here, but I'm going to split both this world and this world based on the 5th digit has to be higher than the 3rd. And let me, just to make it explicit what I'm doing here, this digit right here, in the world where I start 2, 4, my remaining digits are 0, 1, and 3, right? The 5th digit has to be higher than the 3rd digit. So this can't be 3 because then there'd only be 0 and 1 left for the 5th digit. That won't work. So this digit does have to be 0 or 1, right? Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fully bake that rule into my worlds. I'm going to split the 1, 2 world, and I'm going to split the 2, 4 world so that I don't have to keep processing this 5th digit higher than the 3rd digit. I'll do it once, and then I'm going to run through the questions like bang, 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 and move on to the next game. All right. So our big split was here. These will be the 1, 2 solutions, and these will be the 2, 4 solutions. The 1, 2 solutions are going to have a 3rd digit that's either 0 or 3. If the 3rd digit is 0, my 2 remaining numbers, 3 and 4, are both higher than 0. So I don't care which one is 3 and which one is 4. These 2 spots will now be 3 and 4 in either order, and I'll use this handle to indicate that they can switch. In the world where the 3rd digit is 3, the 5th digit has to be higher. For the 5th digit to be higher, it can only be 0 or 4. Well, I guess it has to be 4 because the 5th digit has to be higher than the 3rd digit, leaving only 0 for that spot. Pretty simple, right? Now in my 2 worlds that start with 1, 2, I never have to process any of the rules ever again. So it's just, oh, I can do it this way or this way. Or I could be down here in these 2, 4 worlds. Now in the 2, 4 worlds, and this would be a good spot, by the way, to pause the video. If you're watching this recorded, pause the video here and see if you can write out what I'm going to do next in the 2, 4 worlds. But in the 2, 4 worlds, the 3rd digit's going to be either 1 or 0. When it's 0, whatever the 5th digit is going to be higher than that. So who's left? 1 and 3. And I guess the same thing is going to happen here. 1 and 3 in either order. Don't really care because they're both higher than 3, or sorry, higher than 0. And then in this world, all I've got left is 0 and 3. The 5th digit has to be higher than the 3rd digit. 0 is not higher than 1. So 3 has to go there. 0 has to go here. And now I am completely done with the game. Done like put the cat back on the pen, done with the game, because I am not going to have to do any work to solve questions 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. What I've done here is I have made worlds that incorporated all 4 of my rules so that I never have to think about those rules again. And now it's going to be a free-for-all on answering these questions. Number 1, if the last digit of an acceptable product code is 1, it must be true that what? Well, there's only one world where the 5th digit can be 1, right? That's not going to be 1. That's going to be 3 or 4. That's going to be 4. That's going to be 3. So the only world I can possibly be in order for the last digit to be 1 is this world. And specifically, you would have to flip the 3 and the 1. If you wanted to write that out, you certainly could. It's going to be 2, 4, 0, 3, 1. I think I can hold it in my head that I'm in this world with these guys flipped. And now it says which one must be true. Does the first digit have to be 2? Yes, it does. That's the answer. Does the second digit have to be 0? No, it's 4. Does the third digit have to be 3? No, it's 0. Does the fourth digit have to be 4? No, it's 3. That gets rid of E as well. The answer for number 1 is A. Number 2 says, which one of the following must be true about any acceptable product code? So in all 4 of my worlds, does it have to be true that the 1 is before the 2? No, because I have a couple worlds where the 2 is first. If it must be true, then it must be true in every solution. It doesn't have to be true in every solution. You can put the 2 first. Does it have to be true that the 1 is before the 3? Here it is, and here it is, and here it is, but not here. In this code, the 1 and the 3 can go in either order. So the answer for number 2 is not B. Does the 2 always have to be before the 3? Yes, 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 yes. The 2 is always before the 3. So the answer for number 2 is C. Does the 3 always have to be before the 0? Nah. Does the 4 always have to be before the 3? No. The answer for number 2 is C. Number 3, if the third digit is not 0, which one must be true? So that gets us out of this world and it gets us out of this world, but we still could be here and here. Here the third digit is 3, here the third digit is 1. So which one now must be true both here and here in my check-marked worlds? Which one has to be true both here and here? Second digit is 2. No, it could be 4. Third digit is 3. No, it could be 1. Fourth digit is 0. Yes, yes, that's the answer. Fifth digit is 3. No, it could be 4. Fifth digit is 1. No, it could be 4 or 3. It actually can't be 1. The answer for number 3 is C, because in both worlds where the third digit isn't 0, the fourth digit has to be 0. That's the answer. Number 4, any of the following pairs could be third and fourth respectively. That means in that order, except. So third and fourth digits in order. Can it be 0 then 1? Right here, 0, 1. Can it be 0 then 3? 0, 3. Can it be 1 then 0? 1, 0. Can it be 3 then 0? 3, 0. Can it be 3 then 4? No. There's only one world where 3 can be the third digit, and when 3 is the third digit, 0 has to be the fourth digit. So the answer number 4, E, is the only one that is not an acceptable third and fourth digit in the code. Last one, number 5. Which one of the following must be true about any acceptable product code? There's exactly one digit between the 0 and the 1. No, they can be right next to each other, or they can be farther apart than that. It does not always have to be exactly one digit between the 0 and the 1. How about exactly one digit between the 0 and the 2? Nah, they can be right next to each other. Does it have to be true that there are at most 2 digits between the 1 and the 3? No, in my first world, I could have 1 first and 3 last, which would be 3 digits in between the 1 and the 3. How about at most 2 digits between the 2 and the 3? Nope. In this world, I can have 2 first and 3 last. So there could be 3 digits between the 2 and the 3. How about at most 2 digits between the 2 and the 4? Yeah, in both of these worlds, the 2 is second and the 4 could be last, but still at most that's 2 digits in between the 2 and the 4. In both of these worlds, the 2 and the 4 are right next to each other. So at most, in all solutions, at most, there are 2 digits between the 2 and the 4. And the answer for number 5 is E. I noticed that Alex pointed out in the chat that she had written out all 6 of the worlds. She ended up with 6 worlds. And that's true. She just wrote out the 3-4 and the 4-3 version of this. She also wrote out the 1-3 and the 3-1 version of this. I tend not to do that if I can incorporate it into just one template with like a handle like this. I would tend not to write it out, but you're already getting it, Alex. I mean, if you did get to the point where you had all 6 of the solutions just totally written out, that's fine. I think that this is maybe a little bit more efficient, but you're clearly understanding the principle. And Alex also pointed out that, yeah, it took her a minute to do the setup, but then the questions, right, are just bang, 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 bang. And that's, you know, if you like, if there was like hidden camera, right, and it was me versus an Lsat novice and we were doing the games, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Lsat novice answers number 1 before I do, maybe even answers number 2 before I do. I'm still working on my setup. But what's going to happen is the novice is going to get stuck on one of those questions, probably get stuck on multiple of the questions. And I'm going to have solved the puzzle before I start doing the questions. Once I do number 1, you're probably going to see me go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll be moving on to the next game much faster than that novice was. We have about 5 minutes left in at least my scheduled time. Are there any questions or comments about anything we've done today before we wrap up the class? Kelsey asks, what's the best way to know if this approach will work with a certain game? The purpose of making worlds, Kelsey, is to eliminate rules. If you can eliminate a rule by making worlds, you probably should try it. Not every game is going to be a total home run, but even when it's not a home run, it's probably not going to hurt you to make a split. So for example, Kelsey, in this specific game, if I had just gotten, starting over here, if I had only gotten to this point, I had eliminated that 3rd rule by making 2 worlds. If I couldn't have baked that 4th rule in by splitting this and by splitting this, or if I chose not to, I still have made progress on the solution. So it's not like you have to be sure that it's going to be a home run. What we're looking for is let's make solid contact. And if you can eliminate even 1 rule by making 2 worlds, I feel like you have made solid contact. Maybe the ball flies over the wall, maybe it doesn't fly over the wall. Either way, it's better than like a whiff, right? So I would sorry for the extended baseball analogy, but I would prefer that you try for this sometimes. Anything else? I'd like to thank all of you for coming to this special class. All the different levels of Daemon subscriptions are available at lsatdemon.com. Reminder that in the live version of Lsat Daemon, we have multiple different classes 7 days a week. They're all recorded, so if the times don't work for you, you can just watch them the next day or at your leisure. We have lower levels of Daemon subscriptions. Daemon Premium has my class once a week, practice tests, time sections, office hours. Daemon Basic is more of a self-study tool without any of the live classes, but it does have 24 hours a day drilling with all of my explanations, all of Ben's explanations, and you can do a lot at that basic level of subscription as well. Sorry for the sales pitch. I really hate doing that, but got to pay the bills.
Nate,
Yeah.
this is very informative. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
I wanted to find out, as far as making of the calendar, when you go online to get the calendar,
Yeah,
it's in full print. But when you go to print it, it's not in full print. The borders are narrower. So I was wondering, is there any way you could adjust it?
Make a print version of the calendar? I can certainly think about that. Maybe, I think, Marvin, the best thing for you to do with that question is to email help@lsatdemon.com.
Okay.
The team, Eden and Claire and Brittany and maybe Annalisa, they'll all have thoughts about that. I mean, what you're doing there is you're trying to print a Google Calendar. I think you're probably trying to print it from your web browser.
Yeah.
Printers are already the most evil device in any house. We all know that. So I'm not a printing expert, but I do think that the help@lsatdemon should have ideas.
Okay.
One thing you could do is blow it up real big, take a screenshot, and then try to print that. I bet the printing the screenshot might work better than just printing straight out of the browser. But
Okay.
I despise printers. I try to avoid at all costs.
Okay.
Any other questions? Oh yeah, hi.
I have a quick question. So I've been listening to the podcasts probably for like, I don't know, a year and a half.
Cool.
And so I work full time, went back to school, finished up my bachelor in August, and I signed up for the Lsat. So I took the November Lsat, but I was completely unprepared. You know, I've been a Demon subscriber, but didn't really prep a lot. So I feel I'll be taking it in January. What sort of schedule would you recommend setting up? I'm probably going to try to do live.
We get this question on the podcast a lot. The one thing that we say to everybody is do a little bit every day. The Demon makes it really easy to do a little bit every day because you log on, you hit drill on logical reasoning, and bang, you're doing a logical reasoning question, right? Or you're doing a game, or you're doing a reading comp passage. But just make sure that you do that every day. If you can give me one high quality hour of prep every single day, I know that you will be making progress toward your goals. I would start with that. Like, let me make sure that I'm going to do an hour every day. If I can't do an hour, I'm at least going to do one question every day. And yeah, if you have more time, maybe you have more time on a weekend, maybe you have a day off of work, whatever, you have more time to invest, then sure, come to a longer class or do a full practice test or just do a 2-hour drilling session. But the most important part, I think, is to just do that first little bit every single day. You just kind of got to keep the momentum up.
Okay. Yeah, I just like froze. Like as soon as I sat down to take it, and you know, cameras on, everything, and I just like everything like I learned out the window.
Specifically for you, because you said you froze when you started and the camera was on.
Yeah.
Specifically, I would recommend that you go to our timed sections and reviews. Those timed sections and practice tests on Saturdays, but the timed sections during the week give you multiple opportunities to get over that anxiety that is clearly causing you problems, right? So you show up in the Zoom, your camera's on, and then the proctor is going to say, okay, let's go, everybody do the section. And you just sit there with the camera on while you do your section. You can minimize, you know, you don't have to be like looking at yourself. You can minimize it so that you can just answer the questions without the distraction of looking at the monitor. But you're going to work on the section with the clock ticking and with the camera on so that you can, you know, get nervous. And then you'll make some mistakes. And then one of our teachers will be there right as soon as the section is over. The teacher will be there to answer your questions. So I would specifically recommend that you attend those time sections or the practice tests on Saturdays.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Anybody?
Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Fatima.
This is Fatima. Good to see you. I'm doing well. I did have a question. Do you recommend doing drilling first and then going over the lesson of whatever you're drilling, LR, or do you recommend doing the lesson, reading up on it, and then start drilling on it?
I'm not a big lessons guy. I'm more into do a question and immediately review it. So when you're drilling, I think that should be the idea, right? You hit drill on logical reasoning, for example, you do a question, and then if you missed it or if you struggled with it at all, you immediately watch the videos and read the explanations right there before you even move on to the next question. that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Then if you do it correctly,
Sorry?
like even if you do the question correctly, reviewing it is good, like why you got it correctly, if you guessed, or if you had the
Certainly, if you gave up and randomly guessed and happened to guess correctly, you probably need to read that explanation or watch some videos and try to figure it out, right? If you got it right and you just knew you were getting it right, then maybe you don't need to read the explanation. But if you struggled with it at all, if you narrowed it down to 2, for example, and you picked one and it turned out to be the right one, I would be curious. I would be looking for that written explanation, or I would be watching a video to hear one of us talk about the question so that you can more conclusively eliminate that wrong answer. Ben and I almost never narrow it down to 2. We hardly ever get almost seduced by a wrong answer. And so if you were going back and forth, already that indicates that there's something that you're not understanding. Cool.
thanks, helpful. Yeah.
Awesome. I will be back in class tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm going to do the exact same thing I just did. Couple hours worth of LSAT drilling and explanations. Hope to see you at 5 Pacific tonight if you're a Demon Live subscriber. If you're a Demon Premium subscriber, I'll be back at 4 o'clock Pacific on Thursday night. And I also have my office hours every Monday morning that everybody's welcome to come to. Thanks, everybody. I got to take a little bit of a break. Have a good day. See some of you tonight. Bye.